As an American who has lived in Europe most of his adult life, and who has switched from a corporate storytelling career to a creative one, the story of Northern Lights resonates on a couple of levels. One is deeply personal, having seen my grandparents age and eventually pass in a retirement home. I recall the degree of guilt the family felt, particularly when we could no longer care for my grandfather who was suffering from Alzheimer's. We live in an era of elder care neglect, and our aging populations prove that this topic is the scourge of our legacy. On another level, we often talk in America about how great the social security system is in the Nordic countries and how we'd like to emulate their model better. So it's particularly ironic that in Northern Lights, we explore what happens when the Nordic system tries to be more like the American system. Now, over to my writing and directing partner, Vasco Viana of Portugal.
I remember when I was a child and we had to put my great grandmother in a retirement home. And from that moment on, she refused to speak to anyone, be it members of the family or members of the staff of the retirement home. And that was her way of revolting against that decision. So it was a decision that was made, we thought, for her own good, but one which she didn't agree on. And that stuck with me because a few days later, she died. And that got me thinking about this story, about people who we maybe discard as not having any more use for society, or people that are a burden to take care of, and how they feel about living that latter stage of their lives in a place that is not theirs against their will. And that was the basis for the idea behind Northern Lights. And I contacted my colleague Fear, my Finnish colleague, and we decided to build this story around the idea of old people who are trying to revolt against the system that put them there in the retirement home. So it's basically the Great Escape set in a Scandinavian retirement home. And since the topic is so heavy and can get dark at times, we thought to take its more absurdist qualities and heighten them to make it into more of a comedy whose message is ultimately about the life that is still left in our elders and the rebelliousness that they still have. And the Scandinavian setting came about when talking to Fear, because there was actually a case similar to this, where a major corporation in Finland bought some retirement homes and started cutting costs to make a profit, and thus neglecting the needs, the basic needs of the old people living there. So we thought it was would be a funny idea to imagine a place where all of these cultures, these Scandinavian cultures that have a deep history of maybe some mistrust and some conflicts, they would all have to come together to fight the bigger enemy, which is the system that put them there, and more so the capitalist greed that is taking away and stripping away their basic liberties.
Thanks, Vasco. You know, Northern Lights is a story about what happens when the vulnerable among us fight back against corporate greed and power to secure a better end of life. It is the struggle that all vulnerable people around the world face on a daily basis. We believe that Torino Series Lab would help us bring out the best in the core of this conflict and find the right forum for our story.